The Trial of Chaos is one of the trials of Ascendancy, used to gain powerful specializations for your class. Now, most players first encounter the Trial of Chaos in Act 3 Normal and use it to get their second set of Ascendancy points. But you can actually use the trial to get your first, second, third, and fourth. So, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about exactly how you do that, some of the room layouts you're going to encounter, some tips and tricks for picking the negative modifiers inflicted by the trial, and also talking about the Trialmaster boss fight, the pinnacle encounter that caps it all off and is required to get your fourth Ascendancy. But Path of Exile 2 has 2 Trials of Ascendancy in the early access period, and a third coming later with the full release of the game. So if you want to know how to do the other trials, then do be sure to get subscribed and ring that notification bell to see all future uploads. For now, let's get into things, starting with the very basics. There are 3 different versions of the Trial of Chaos that drop, accessed via an inscribed ultimatum. The first has 4 rounds. This is the one you'll encounter starting in the campaign. The second requires a higher item level and has 7 rounds. The third is item level 75 plus, it is the most important, and it lasts for 10 rounds. The 4-round Trial of Ascendancy can be used for either your first or second Ascension. The 7-round one is exactly the same, which is a little bit weird. Then the 10-round Trial of Chaos can be used for the third and gives you optional access to the Trialmaster at the end, which is used for your fourth. You'll also get one of the 3 fragments used to confront Trialmaster after defeating the final boss in a 10-wave ultimatum. Now, while the Trial of Chaos does have some randomization, it's not fully random either. Round 1 is always going to be defeat all the monsters. To complete this challenge type, well, you kill the monsters. I don't know what to tell you. Round 2, survive until the timer expires. You do not technically have to kill monsters here, but killing monsters certainly makes it a lot easier. Also, if you're an intelligence class or a class that can get a good bit of intelligence, maybe try using Frostwall to wall things off. Now, round 3 can either be escort the statue or collect all the soul cores. To escort the statue, you need to stay pretty darn close to it, which means any modifiers that constrict your space or ability to move, such as Stalking Shade, can get extremely annoying. They will constantly push you out of range of a statue or force you to take potentially lethal damage. So my tip here is try to not take too many of the modifiers that constrict the ways in which you can move. Basically, you just follow the statue to the end. You can kill monsters along the way. Again, Frostwell is helpful. Or in theory, if you're a super tanky Giga Chad, you can just ignore all the monsters and walk to the end, or RP walk, because the statue isn't exactly quick. For the soul cores, on the other hand, there's a few different layouts. Sometimes there's a little bit of a puzzle aspect where you have to raise and lower walls to collect the soul cores, but there's always going to be 3 of them. After you collect a soul core, monsters spawn and try to stop you. You also take a stacking damage over time effect so long as you're carrying a soul core. So after you select a soul core, run back to the altar as quickly as you can and socket it in, both to stop the additional monster spawns and prevent the damage over time. Now, round 4 is always a random boss. More about that in a minute. Round 5 is either defeat the monsters or survive until the timer expires. Round 6 is either soul cores or the sacrificial altar. For the sacrificial altar, monsters will appear in these ritual circles. You need to kill them within the circles so that their blood can be used to fill the altar. This is a relatively easy task since it's just kill monsters, but it does take a bit of time, meaning if you have anything that stacks up or ramps up, you're going to be spending an uncomfortable amount of time within this trial. Round 7, defeat a boss again. Round 8, defeat monsters or survive. And then for round 9, my experience is you can either be given escort the statue or slave him in the blood circles. And this is the same thing that Zen experienced when he was testing for the Maxwell Guide, so I feel pretty confident in it. Round 10, you defeat the boss. But okay, I've mentioned defeat the boss 3 times now on round 7, 4, and 10. But here's the thing. I haven't mentioned what boss or how you defeat it. And that's because the boss you encounter is random. Also, as a quick note, the difficulty of these fights varies based on your build's strength and the modifiers you have. So don't take any of the amount of damage that you see me taking or dealing as indicative of your experience. Now the first boss I'm going to talk about is Balak the Skyseer. This avian foe is quite the challenge, especially as his health gets low. Initially, most of his attacks are pretty simple. He'll try to strike at you, he may use some electrically charged abilities, and he'll fire blades of force while flying into the air. None of these things are super dangerous if you have good defenses and a solid amount of recovery. What is extremely dangerous, though, is his tornado move. This obscures most of a screen, making it really hard to avoid obstacles on the floor, and it does absolutely massive degenerative damage that seems to be physical damage over time, which therefore bypasses most defenses. In other words, the tornadoes are super dangerous. If you have high damage, you can absolutely kill him before he fires off a single tornado. But if you don't have very high damage, you're going to have to get used to dodging carefully. And I mean especially carefully because, man, that thing comes out far faster than you'd expect. So overall, I would say Balak the Skyseeker is actually the most difficult boss. Next up, there is Uxmal the Beast Lord. If you remember the Chimera boss that you fought to get your first entry token to the Trial of Chaos, this guy is more or less the same, and he has similar moves. A lot of his stuff is just simple things like Fire Breath, Fireball, etc. Not too bad to deal with. But there are two things to be especially careful of. The first is his Tail Poison Barrage. This could be very deadly, especially if you are low on Chaos Resistance. The other is his Frost Breath, mostly because it's really hard to see, it can slow you, and it deals a significant amount of damage. So, if he does either of these moves, treat them with care. As for the rest, I personally didn't find it to be too challenging, and I'd actually say that Uxmal is the easiest of the three bosses. Then finally you have Chetza the Feathered Plague. This boss is able to summon some bone spikes, which restrict your movement. They can be very annoying, especially if you end up walling yourself off and getting hit by either the projectile barrage that rains from the ceiling, or the big vomit/smash that the boss does in front of himself. In short, try to never be in front of a boss, and if there's a big thing raining down on you from the sky, keep moving, do not stop, stopping is death. In addition to this, Chetza will sometimes regurgitate a Plagueling, which attacks you separately from the boss. This thing is more of a nuisance than an actual threat, so don't take your eyes off the boss because that's the thing that is most likely to kill you. And don't worry, the Plagueling goes back into the boss sometimes as well if you don't kill the boss first. Due to restricting the space and due to how deadly the barrage is, I'd say this is a medium difficulty encounter, although if you take the wrong modifiers, it can be significantly harder. And so that, let's get into those. Now, Zen has a full list as part of his guide over on Maxroll. So if you want to know all the details, I strongly recommend taking a look at that instead. The basic premise is all of the modifiers change the field of battle. So for example, Storm Color runes will cause glyphs to appear on the ground. If you stand in it, the glyph gets redder and angrier, until eventually lightning comes down and, if you're not lightning res capped, kills you. If you're lightning res capped, mildly annoys you. For some builds, some of these are going to be beyond trivial. If you have high lightning res, high health, and good recovery, you can just ignore Stormcaller runes. They aren't a thing. Similarly, I am playing a Chaos Inoculation build. So I completely ignore chaotic monsters, because damages extra chaos does not exist for me. I also ignore toxic monsters, because poison does not exist for me. I'm immune, and bleed is also not a thing that exists for me. I'm immune because you have to damage life to inflict bleeding, and if an enemy has gotten through all of my energy shield and all of my mana and damaged my life, I only have one of it, so I'm dead anyway. What do I care? I can't really say these are all of the most dangerous modifiers for your build. There are certainly some things that you will have to check, but I am going to talk about a few of the modifiers that I personally have found to be most dangerous, and from talking to other people, I believe are most dangerous to most builds in the game. The first being Stalking Shade. The shade itself does not do damage, but it is very annoying, and it inflicts the Ruin debuff. If you get hit 7 times and gain 7 stacks of Ruin, then you fail the trial. Do not pass go, do not collect 200 Exalted Orbs. As a result of this, it can put you in a lot of bad situations where you try to dodge with shade in a panic and walk into a mechanic that was actually far more devastating. So especially the higher ranks of the Stalking Shade, I do not recommend. Next up, Petrification statues, which I don't have footage of, because I found it so annoying after my first experience that I rage quit that trial and have not recorded any with petrification statues since. They are just so numerous and they petrify you so quickly that it is really, really annoying. WASD helps a little bit because you can kind of walk towards but also face away from them. Either way, just avoid this one. It's really awful. Next up, reduce defenses. This can be up to 75% less defenses, which is armor, energy shield, and evasion. Defenses are what helps your character survive, so reducing them is really bad. In the same way, reduced resistances is also an awful modifier. I do not recommend taking either of these unless it's say for the very end on a boss and you're super confident that you are going to burst it down before it's a threat. Personally, I also really dislike enraged bosses. I don't know the exact numbers in terms of damage and defense, but it feels like they get way tankier and are genuinely scary. I've had my energy shield pool blown away in a single hit with enraged bosses. So I don't advise taking this one either, but again, if your build is so strong that you just one-shot them, then it's not a big deal. Now, in addition to these dangerous negative modifiers, I also wanted to call out lethal rare monsters, where rare monsters have 2 additional modifiers and you get more rare monsters. Sounds really bad, right? Well, kind of. On one hand, it is technically really bad to have more and more dangerous rare monsters, but there's a reason this is a node on the Atlas passive tree, because those lethal rare monsters drop significantly more loot. So if you're going to farm it, I highly recommend having a build that is capable of doing this modifier and you take it every time it's offered. If you're just trying to get your ascendancy points, feel free to avoid it because more loot isn't worth the chance of failure and having to redo things from the beginning. So that's how the trial goes, the bosses you'll face, and some of the negative modifiers you need to avoid. But here's the thing, if you make it all the way to the end, you also can choose to put in 3 of the fates to challenge the Trialmaster himself. To do this, you need to collect a Cowardly Fate, Deadly Fate, and Victorious Fate by defeating the 10th wave boss. The exact boss does not matter, remember, they're all randomized, but whichever boss appears at the 10th wave will always drop a fate. Oh, and you can buy them from a currency exchange if you don't happen to get the ones you want or simply don't want to run through it 4 times. Now, an interesting thing about the Trialmaster, he is not affected by the modifiers you've selected up until this point. Those apply to the trial itself, but not to the Trialmaster. Instead, he's just a pretty standard boss fight, and for the most part his moves are, he attacks you and deals physical damage. Not too big of a deal. But there are a couple things that you should keep an eye out for. The first is his big charged explosion. This is a very slow move, where he slams his mace into the ground, a red circle slowly grows, and then it explodes for large damage. While this is a very lethal move, it's also very easy to avoid. On the other hand, his branching slam is a little bit more difficult to avoid, where he will slam the ground, and it splits into 3 points, pathing along the terrain as it goes. To avoid this, the best thing to do is actually to get behind the boss, because it fires in a conical direction. If he's over near a wall when he uses it, that's a little bit more unfortunate, and it makes things more difficult. While this does hit hard, I suspect for most characters a single hit is going to be survivable, but if you take multiple hits because you try to dodge out of it and then dodge where it's going to branch, you're probably going to die. So in some cases, it is better to watch it approach and then dodge as it gets very close. There is, however, a much more lethal version of his move, where he stops time, teleports to 3 locations, and unleashes 3 of the branching slams. Now, you can't just go directly behind the boss. In some cases, if you're near a wall, it actually is as easy as rolling through towards the middle of a room. Spoiler alert, positioning yourself towards a wall makes this quite a bit easier. But if you happen to be near the middle of a room and it's going to spread out all over, you really do just have to watch where the Trialmaster teleports during the time freeze and see, as the branching slams grow, where the safe spaces are. In addition to this, he has several other moves. Melee attacks, a pulsing thing from his axe, a whirlwind move. I'm not going to get into the details for that here, because quite honestly, I don't think any of those moves are super difficult to deal with. And if you're struggling with any of those, that's really a sign that your build isn't geared enough for this encounter. I'd recommend farming up, maybe leveling a bit more, and then trying it again in the future. It's also well worth noting that there's a point at which none of this matters. If you have enough gear and if you do enough damage, you can pretty much just global the Trialmaster. So with that, you should have all the information you need to take down the Trialmaster and obtain your 4th Ascendancy. What if you want to go back? This time, not simply to prove yourself, but for all the fun loot. Well, there are a couple things to keep an eye out for. First up, the Fates that drop from the 10th round are required for people ascending, so especially after a reset, these are going to be pretty valuable. Second of all, Soul Cores. These are items exclusive to the Trial of Chaos that further enhance your items in a way similar to runes, except much, much better. So for example, the Soul Core of Askapa can be placed in a weapon to add 15 spirit, or placed in armor to add 10% increased rarity of items found, an incredibly valuable stat currently. For the most part, the soul cores that are going to be valuable are the ones you want to put into armor rather than weapons. This is because your armor simply has more sockets than your weapons do. A lot more builds are going to have 2 in their chest piece, and another 4 across other various items, for 6 total. If you really get into things like corruption, min-maxing, then we're talking 2 in the helmet, 2 in the gloves, 2 in the boots, 3 in the shield, that's already up to 9, and another 5 in the chest piece for 14. In other words, soul cores get used much more for armor than for weapons, thus that is what drives a majority of their value. You get 1 soul core each time you beat a boss, so 3 total for your run. And if you have a particularly valuable one, like as Kappa, it might be worth just leaving your run early if you're at all worried about dying and losing the extreme value. But soul cores aren't the only valuable things. In addition to this, there are 2 drops from the Trialmaster. The first is Mahuksotl's Machination. This vastly enhances the effect of socketed soul cores. And with Corruption, you can socket 3 of them, making it a really cool customize your own item kind of endgame shield. Alternatively, the other most valuable drop is the Adorned, that vastly enhances the effect of your jewels, provided you are willing to use magic jewels. But it results in some of the strongest endgame builds available in Path of Exile 2. So if you want to farm some currency, you can definitely challenge the Trial of Chaos in the hopes of obtaining one of these rare and powerful rewards. On the other hand, if you want some more details on the Trial of Chaos, then do be sure to check out the full written guide from Zen over at MaxwellGG. That'll be linked down below. On the other hand, if you're looking for something else to watch, then maybe check out my videos on how to beat the first Trial of Asekimas and how to make the Trial of Asekimas easier. These should make the trial experience much less painful, which admittedly is still kind of painful depending on your build. Though for some characters you're definitely going to breeze through once you get good relics. Either way, those will be up in the card and down below. But for now I'm curious, how do you feel about the difficulty of the Trial of Chaos? Did you try it and get absolutely destroyed? Did you breeze through your first one and you're just here looking at the endgame stuff? Let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments below. Personally, I found it to be much, much easier in the Trial of Asekimas, and did indeed breeze through my 4th Ascension when I did it, partially because I did it way too late, because I thought it was equal difficulty to the Trial of Asekimas. Oh well, now I know better and I'll be able to ascend much faster on all future characters. So with that, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.